Okay, so welcome. Today we'll be discussing trauma response, and our aim is to intersect the psychology of trauma responses with the spirituality of it. Because truth is everything psychology says. The scripture also says something. And as children of God, having experienced trauma, it's good to know what Haba says about it, in addition to whatever psychology may tell us. And that way we will not just have or just experience healing to the mind psychologically. We can also experience healing that transcends the mind to the soul, to the spirit man. So now, what are trauma responses? Trauma response is an automatic, self-protective, unconscious reaction that survivors experience in situations that are reminiscent of their past trauma. So they are subconscious automatic response that people are not even aware that they are putting out such response. And many situations that are reminiscent of trauma, the victims would not even know that this reminds me of my past trauma. They just know that emotionally, on some level, they feel similar to the way they felt when they experienced trauma, oftentimes childhood trauma. And that was the adaptive mechanism that helped them cope as children. But then as adults, these become automatic responses that they are not even conscious of them. The hope is that at the end of this presentation that we will be conscious of trauma responses we have, if we do have any. The truth is most people have one or two. It's just that the extent to which it affects people's lifestyle and relationships is on a spectrum. So for some people, they're on the other extreme end of the spectrum where it's really messing things up. And for some people, they are aware of it that really have this trauma response, but then I'm able to do life with it. So that is what trauma responses are. But then you would then ask me, what is trauma? Trauma is an overwhelming event or a series of events that your body and mind cannot grasp or cope with. So a child of 4 who was beaten till there are blood on the body. Such a child's body and mind cannot cope with the gravity of such an injury. That will be considered traumatic, regardless of the intention of the perpetrator, as the case may be. So eventually every traumatic experience, especially if it happens in childhood, and even if it does happen in adulthood, begins to negatively alter the way you see God, the way you see you, the way you see yourself, the way you see others, and then the way you see the world in general. So for someone who had an abusive father and then gets told that God is a loving father, and who has the question of which God, which father? The earthly father I had was abusive, and then you tell me there's a God I cannot see who is all good, who is all loving. So that abusive, traumatic childhood relationship already alters the person's perception of God. So the infinite goodness of God is a questionable subject to such an individual. Or someone who says, I am not good enough, or I am not lovable. We discuss core beliefs, or I am not worthy. For please, if you've not watched deconstructive negative beliefs or challenging negative beliefs, I think it was some weeks ago, please go find it and watch it. That thought or belief system would oftentimes arise from a number of previous past traumatic experiences. So it alters the way we see God, the way we see ourselves, the way we see others. When someone says all men has come, or I'm not going to get married because at the end of the day, men will still do what they need to do. The person has seen such a template that has ingrained such a negative belief in the person's mindset, or someone says the world is a dangerous place. The world is unsafe. Really, there are evil in the world. There are evils in the world, but that doesn't mean that it's unsafe across. But that again will be trauma that is speaking. So at the end of the day, trauma is not what happened to you. It is what happened in you, the change. And oftentimes, the emotional change that seeds a root of a negative core belief. That is what you would call the traumatic entity, because the truth is the same trauma some people experience. Some other people also experienced it, and just by some stroke of luck, by grace, by the way they are wired, by temperament, by some other support system they had available at that time, they came out of such a traumatic experience without such a negative mindset. It's like an auto crash happens, and you have 10 people, and 5 of them come out and they say, "Thank God we did not die." And another 5 comes out and they start bemoaning the experience. The same experience, different perception, different takeaway from such an experience. So my interest is for someone who was traumatized and still lives with the scars and the core beliefs and the negative trauma responses of such an experience. So that's my aim, not for someone who says I was traumatized and nothing happened from there. I salute you, I'm happy for you. So the aim is to address those who would still have challenges here and there and see how they can begin to do life wholly as God intends them to. Okay, so now picture this. Trauma responses, there are 4 major ones. I want to use this picture to explain those 4 responses. The prehistoric man, supposing you're being chased by a wild beast, a lion in this case. What are the options available to you? The first thing is, if you feel you can fight, you face the lion and start to fight. If you feel, no, I cannot overpower this, the wiser thing to do is to run. So the first thing is to run. So this person is taking a flight. Flight is the first trauma response. Or this person feels, okay, I can really face this lion, this challenge, this traumatic experience, decides to fight. Fight is the second trauma response. Then we now get to, okay, you cannot fight, you cannot run. The other option you have is, could you start asking for help? That is fun. FAWN. Okay, so I can't run, I can't fight, there's no one to ask for help. That leaves me with one option. Okay, can I freeze all my responses such that even if the animal does attack, I do not feel so much pain? So almost like playing dead. Now, how this applies to day-to-day experiences. For instance, you have a child, 10-year-old, who is being physically assaulted by a grown man. Can a 10-year-old fight an adult? No. Can the child run? Probably. But if he runs, he will probably be chased down. So fight and flight is not there. Now, is this child able to go around looking for help? Please come and beg daddy, so that I will not beat the living daylight out of me. If that is possible, that leaves the child with the opportunity to fawn. But if the first 3 are not available, what option does this child have? Boxed in the corner, being whipped with belts or koboko, regardless of the part of Nigeria you come from. So the child is in that corner and is frozen. So you literally will have some children so they hold their breath just to endure the beating, and then when you're done beating, they just sigh and start sobbing if they can. And some children are so frozen so well that they take all the beatings and they do odechi because they have been frozen. So it's almost like they built a wall between the external response and the internal response. So the beating is not getting to them, and you're like, why is this child, the more I beat, the worse it gets? It's just because that child has frozen the response, so he's not really getting all of the correction, quote and unquote, that you're doing is not getting to the child. So the child becomes rebellious, as the case may be. So those are the 4 major trauma responses. There's a 5th one that is newly added, flop, but that is not discussed here. So I discussed the first 4 because that is the commonest that we would encounter, and that is probably the commonest that most people will relate with. So the flight response, like I said, is to escape from the traumatic situation, which is not available for many people who were victims of childhood trauma. So they cannot remove themselves from such a traumatic situation. The fight response, when fighting is an option, it could be verbally or physically. Those are the children who talk back. Those are the children who are the bullies in school. Those are the children who defy authority. I mean, they're writing names of noisemakers. They will be the one to even make noise. They say, write my name, what will you do? Those are the children that will just grab your pen and start running, and you chase them and they tell, what do you mean? Are you the first person to have a pen? And they throw it back at you. Those are fight responses. But now, when they were within the confines of their own home, it may serve as a coping mechanism because that's all they have to work with. That's all the resources at their disposal. But eventually, when they become adults or they play such responses outside, it becomes maladaptive because one is messing up their own life, is messing up relationships, is messing up interactions with people, and they will then affect people with their own trauma responses. So now someone who has a fun response, it could just be, okay, we're keeping the bear happy, so we bend over backwards, entertain the bear, try to look for people to placate the bear. In this case, the the trauma perpetrator, as the case may be. So that could be the child who is placating the mother, who will do everything the father says at the detriment of what they really want. You know the saying you have in Africa, obey before complaint. Children are meant to be seen and not heard. And then when you have that picture perfect child, who the parent will tell, this one will never complain, will never counter instructions, is always doing everything we say. Truth is, children should wriggle a bit for them to begin to exercise a sense of autonomy, for them to start learning negotiation skills. But if a child is raised in such a way that it is 100% compliant, chances are that child has begun to fawn or has begun to freeze, because fighting was not an option. I mean, you can't fight your parent. Running was not an option at home. You run, they go and bring you back. So the two options is, okay, do I fawn and just keep them happy and maintain things status quo at the detriment of such a child finding himself or herself? Then, so such an individual will do whatever it takes to avoid or diffuse danger, or diffuse what traumatic response, diffuse verbal abuse, diffuse physical abuse, diffuse sexual abuse, whatever it is. Then you have the fourth response, which is the freeze response. So such individual, it's like playing dead, like I said. Biologically, if a carnivore is going to attack an animal of prey, there's a phase where they can freeze dead. So there's a global autonomic shutdown. Both the sympathetic system shuts down, so they go into parasympathetic overdrive, such that even when the animal bites in that state, they don't feel the pain. And if the animal does die in that pain, it was almost like a messy death. Now, if you transpose this to humans, freezing dead is, of course, fight, flight, fun are not available. So they shut down their ability to think, their ability to speak, their ability to fight or flight. So those are the children you ask them, what do you want? I don't know. Those are the children that they're always locked in their room, and you're wondering why you're not interacting with people. I mean, they are already in parasympathetic overdrive. There's nothing that excites them. Their face is always flat. There's nothing you can do that can make them say, oh, with all of the excitement, because they're frozen. Someone who phones can still fake the smile just to keep you happy, can still fake the compliance just to keep you happy. The frozen is just there, almost like a ghost in the house, so to say. Now, these children may be wonderful academically. They may do all they can do academically and be the straight A students. But emotionally, on a connection level, you can't just reach such children. And when they become adults, some of the common complaints of their spouses is that I cannot reach him, I can't reach her. It's like they're automatic. They have a wall, an invisible wall up, because they've been frozen all their life in childhood, and then now they're adults and they don't know how to unfreeze. So now, the flight response, what are some symptoms you would observe? They are overthinkers. They are prone to anxiety. They are prone to panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. They are perfectionistic, because the more they do, the less they have to worry about uneasy emotions, uneasy thought patterns. So they want to do everything and do it to the state of perfection. They want to avoid things that will make them feel that anything that they will not be perfect at, they would avoid it at all costs. But at the end of the day, they are really sad. And oftentimes they're lonely because they're not really connecting. They're just running from reality of things. Now, the fighters, quote and unquote, someone who has a fight response, is controlling. Those are the ones who will shout, who will lash out. They are given to anger. They have explosive behaviors. They could be quite irritable and maybe quite irrational sometimes. They are quite judgmental of other people. They are prone to self-harm. Now, someone who has a freeze response would oftentimes report feeling stuck in life, like they don't know what's the next thing to do. They may dissociate a lot. Dissociation, they are with you, their body is there with you, but mentally and psychologically they've checked out. So that could be someone who is watching a movie and 15 minutes elapses. The body was seated right in front of the screen, but their mind checked out on them after a while. Or that could be a child who is in school and is struggling to keep his mind or her mind in what the teacher is teaching. That could even be a full-grown adult who reads and finds that he or she goes from page 1 to page 2 and does not know how it transcended. So had to go back again to go and read it. So they could have a bit of attention deficit. It's not ADHD, but they have dissociative disorders. Then oftentimes they would isolate themselves. Those are the loners. They are emotionally numb. Really, they can't come in contact with their emotion because it's frozen. Then they shut down very easily. You're saying something or doing something that does not really augur well with them. Now, they know they feel uncomfortable emotionally. They cannot name it. They're not in touch with it. So they just shut down on you. So you literally can see their face, that this person's face is frozen. Life is exhausting for such individual. Many times they have problem making decisions. Now, for those who have fun response, they're oftentimes overwhelmed with life because they will burn a candle on many ends. They will be the one who will be at the service of most people, at the beck and call, no boundaries. They're almost like the ones you can trust. But oftentimes they are shouldering more than they should, because from childhood they never learned to say no. Not that they never learned, they were not allowed to say no. The only option that was available for them was to comply. So as adults, they become extremely compliant. They do not have their own identity, so they lack a sense of identity. They are at risk of being in codependent relationship. They are extremely appeasing. They criticize themselves a lot. Now, these trauma responses, how does it play out in relationships? For someone who is stuck in flight response, some of the things you would observe if they're in relationship with you, or they happen to be your co-staff, or they happen to be your fellow staff, church members, whatever the case may be, is that they're oftentimes extremely reactive and defensive when held accountable or criticized. So that could be, there's a group of people given a project to do, and the teacher, or so to say, or the boss or the instructor begins to correct the team. This is probably the individual who stands up and begins to defend himself or herself. Bear in mind, the correction is meant for the whole team, not the individual. Then many times these individuals will ignore or shut down other people's perspectives completely. I mean, you're talking to them, it's almost like they didn't hear you. They easily feel threatened in some way. So you don't need to say much for them to feel threatened and begin to lash back at you. They are prone to outbursts of anger. Many times they are shouting, or otherwise they become aggressive during confrontations. Those are the ones that can break bottles and start to poke people. Those are the ones that can literally, you see them on the road fighting. In the office, they're the ones screaming at everybody. Then they can resort to insults or threats or blaming the other person during conflicts. They are unpredictably explosive. Their tempers are also explosive with high level of shame afterward. I mean, after they've broken down, exploded like that, many times they feel an overwhelming sense of shame. But again, then they cover it up with more fight response, just so that they don't feel the overwhelming sense of shame. Then they have a tendency to end up in verbal or physical fights. If you see a grown man who is involved in a physical brawl outside, chances are, if you really check the person's personality over a period of time, that person has some spectrum of trauma response, which is the flight response in particular. Now, someone who is talking a fight response place. Someone who is stuck in flight response. Some manifestations you will see in relationship with them, maybe relationship as a spouse, fiance, co-worker, church member, department member, as the case may be, is that they would have this avoidance habit. They will physically leave an uncomfortable situation, or they will change or avoid difficult topics or hard conversations. So either they will just excuse themselves, just so they've ghosted you, they've gone. They are usually very quick to end relationships, very quick, without even needing to give you so many reasons as to why it needs to be ended. They are also very quick to end jobs, so they can quit on you at any time. They're constantly overthinking. They're trying to escape and stay distracted through substances, so many times they may have one form of addiction or the other. Addiction necessarily may not be drugs, so for some of them it may be work related addiction, because they feel, okay, when I'm at this work, at least I don't have to deal with the pain that they've been burying or they've swept under the carpet for decades. Then they would oftentimes struggling with making commitments, and they feel trapped easily when they've made a commitment, so they don't want to take such a chance because they have to have an exit to take a flight if things are not working well. They have a constant need to be busy. So if you find that you're someone who cannot just sit still and just enjoy life, or you feel if you spend 30 minutes not doing anything, you get restless, chances are you may have some spectrum of flight response. Then they struggle to stay in the present moment, so they either fast forward to the future or backwarded, so to say, to the past. They are not really here and now, just to be here and just enjoy the moment as it is. It's not given to someone who experiences or who is stuck in flight response. They have a high level of perfectionism and anxiety. They are people you can trust to do things and do it well, but at the expense of so much anxiety to their own personal self. You can really trust them. I mean, they are the ones who will give you 110 over 100, but at the risk of them having experienced so much anxiety just to get it done. Now, still someone with the flight trauma response, they are chronically rushing or always going. They feel uncomfortable or even panic when they are still. They spend energy micromanaging people and situations around them. So if they happen to be your boss, they may have challenges delegating, so they want to oversee every single detail. Many times they have a history of abruptly ending a relationship or have a phobia of commitment. I said that earlier. Then they make plans to avoid any downtime or throw themselves in work and achievement. That is if they don't have any form of addiction. Then you often present, if you see them in therapy, as anxiety or panic attack. And many times they can intentionally or unintentionally distract themselves. Okay, now someone who is stuck in fawn response. Personally, of all these trauma responses, my heart goes out to someone who is in fawn response the most. Because they just bend over backwards just to make everybody happy. Now, they are extremely people pleasing. They take full responsibility. They will not advocate for their own needs, even when they are not at fault or they are being mistreated. So you understand why they would oftentimes get caught in dysfunctional relationship, in codependent relationships. They oftentimes have problems setting boundaries or saying no out of fear. Many times they will end up losing their identity, and they would only be concerned about being with people who have some form of codependency into. So you have a controller who has a fight response, who would oftentimes peer in relationships with someone who has a fawn response, who is at the mercy of someone with a fight response. Then they would agree or change their own opinion easily, even when they do not actually agree, just because they want to keep peace, they want to maintain status quo. Then they have surface level panic-fueled relationship or affection when they feel that you're about to let them go. So they may be unduly clingy in relationships, and oftentimes they are overly apologetic. They can't say no to anyone. I mean, to anyone. And they will assume responsibility for another person's emotional reactions and mood. So they almost like they want to mother everybody, but they are mothering everybody, mother, MOTHER, at the expense of their own happiness, at the expense of their own sanity. Then they try to predict and actively avoid behaviors that might upset others. Then they avoid talking about issues that will trigger the abuser. Then many times, if they're in a codependent relationship, they will excessively compliment the abuser. Then still some manifestations you'll see is this is the person who would be discussing a painful experience and is also smiling or laughing. And you're wondering, it just does not correlate. There's a disconnect because they're disconnected from their own personal experience. Many times we ignore their own needs, their wants and feelings. They blame themselves for things or believe that they deserve the abuse for someone who has been abused. Then many times they may even be in denial about the abuse. They'll be the one who tell you that it's not so bad. That could be someone who tells you that my husband beat me, but at least he still let me sleep in the house. My friend, when she was beaten, the husband chased her out. I mean, those are two evils. But when you feel that mine is not so bad because somebody else's own is worse, you're just trying to justify and undermine the significance of the abuse. Then they oftentimes take over parenting roles and they become super responsible early on. That's how many times they begin to fawn, because as children, they had to comply. They had to be super responsible. They had to be super trustworthy. They had to ignore their own needs to be able to tend to the needs of their parental personality, so to say. Maybe a biological parent, maybe someone else who raised them, but in any case, they had to give up themselves in order to be who they were expected to be as children. That allowed them to survive their childhood. It was an adaptive coping mechanism, but as adults, it becomes a maladaptive coping mechanism. Many times they will never ask for their needs. So they may be like the peaceful guests that will not upset you, will not rock the boat. Because they won't tell you they need soap, they won't tell you they need anything. That's not the best. Then many times when they're hungry or they are sad or hot, you will not even see it on them and you're like, no, you're really very emotionally stable. There are those people who are like that. But that's across board. But then someone who has a fun response, I mean, this is really painful. Other people are feeling the weight of the emotion. But someone with a fun response will just smile, try to medicate and try to nurse other people's emotions at the expense of their own. Okay, so now someone who is stuck in freeze response, many times they will have a hard time making decisions. They feel numb emotionally. They feel detached and oftentimes isolated. They shut down, they dissociate, or otherwise become spaced out. So you're talking with them and they've just checked out on you, not intentionally. Just the mind takes a break, because that was how they took a break to survive. The child that had to be beaten and was locked in a corner, the body had to check out, the mind had to check out of the body for the child to be able to endure the physical torture. A child who was sexually abused, consciously or unconsciously in many cases, the mind had to check out of the body to be able to endure the torture of such a painful experience. But then that allowed the person cope and survive the horror of such a childhood. As adults, it become an hindrance to their relationship, to their life, to their own health. Okay? Then many times these are the ones who will give you silent treatment, who can keep malice very well, and will just put up a fence or a wall that you cannot see and you just know you can't reach them. They give up very quickly when they're trying to advocate for themselves or their own needs. So that could be someone who is trying to explain something to you and just says, don't worry. And you say, what now? Tell me. I say, don't worry. Don't worry. But you can see that this person is not pleased, but he or she has given up, and you have to start drawing it out of them. Many times they will procrastinate even with simple tasks or easy conversations. Now, some manifestations you will still observe in someone with a freeze response is that they feel completely numb, like life is pointless. They will shut down easily, give silent treatment, or completely avoid you. You may find that they're hiding out from the world. They procrastinate. They find it very difficult to make even small decisions. These are the ones that may be caught in social media addiction because they live life through it. At least if they can't relate with other people, they can give themselves a facade of relating with other people via social media. So they may be scrolling endlessly on social media. They may not leave comments. They just saw everything that everybody else is doing, but without commenting, like they're ghosting. Then if it really gets bad, I told you it's on a spectrum. They may even begin to get confused over what is real or what is unreal. Who did I converse with yesterday? Did I see this person yesterday? Did this person call me yesterday? So eventually reality and the other side becomes confusing for them. Then they may be confused with a diagnosis of depression. They may be misdiagnosed as such. It's not the same thing. And many times they give up quickly. Now, some with freeze response is at a high risk of developing depression. But the freeze trauma response is like an automatic lifestyle on many levels once they experience things that are reminiscent of their trauma. And for those for whom it's really bad, even when they don't have an experience that is reminiscent of trauma, they live in that mode. The way I would explain is like someone who goes to Antarctica and needs to wear 10 layers of sweaters to keep warm. I mean, when you're in Antarctica, 10 layers of sweater will allow you to survive. But if you come down to Nigeria and you don't start shedding those 10 layers of sweater, the same 10 layers of sweater that helped you cope in Antarctica will eventually kill you when you're in Nigeria. So the same trauma response that allowed the individual cope or survive a difficult childhood, when they come back home or when they become adults, as the case may be, it becomes maladaptive. It's no longer a coping mechanism. Rather, it is an undoing of their own entire self and an undoing of their relationship and any other type of positive prospect they may want to build for themselves. Now, it will interest you to know that trauma response is also in the Bible. The Bible says the things which is the same thing that was. There's nothing new under the sun. Some Bible characters that depicted fight responses: Moses and Peter. I'll just talk briefly on Moses. Moses was the only son that survived when Pharaoh started to kill the male child that were born to the Hebrew women. So, and this was the young man that was raised in the house of Pharaoh, just as a reminder. But then you remember the part where he went out and he saw two Hebrew men fighting. And he got so angry. No, he saw an Egyptian fighting with an Hebrew man. And he got angry and killed the Egyptian. I mean, from where to where? By the time we go out the following day, said, then he saw two other Hebrew men fighting, and he was telling them that both of you are brethren, you should not be fighting. And they told him, who made you Lord over us? Do you want to kill us the way you have killed the Egyptian? And of course, he had to run. Then, by the time he went up the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments, and he came back, and Aaron had built a golden calf for the Israelites, what will he do? He grounded that golden calf and gave it to the Israelites to drink. That, to me, looks like someone with a fight response. It's like my way or the highway. You mess up like this, I show you the pepper. Moses was someone like that. And God still referred to him as the humblest man who ever lived. But just to let us know that regardless of any trauma response that you may find yourself manifesting, is to find that there was a replica of you in the Bible. And if the person coped and with the help of God was able to wrought exploits, then with healing, with therapy, with everything you need to do, you can begin to shed off the many layers of the trauma response. The same way someone who comes from the North Pole will shed off the many layers of the cardigan that has to wear. Moses had anger issues. And at the end of the day, it was the same anger issue that prevented him from entering the promised land. If you remember when God told him to strike the rock once, in anger he struck it thrice. And God had to show him the promised land and tell him he will not get there. And these were anger issues that he had been manifesting earlier on, from the moment he killed that Egyptian up till the day he struck the rock thrice. And God was like, this one, I'm done with you. So to let us know that while the trauma responses are there, if it's not addressed as one ought to, it can be the undoing of every prospect that God has in mind for us. So the trauma happened, and I am sorry it did. But it happened to you. It doesn't define who you are, except you want it to define you. So it's from the moment you realize that I have patterns that are not serving my purposes, that you begin to take those intentional steps to see how you can unravel them, and with the help of God come out better at the other hand. Then Peter too was also someone with a fight response. It was quite it was someone who spoke in a rush. That's the best way I can talk about it. Because when he was telling Jesus that he would be with him even to death, and Jesus said he would deny him 3 times. He said no, that is not possible. This was the same Peter that slashed somebody's hair when they came to arrest Jesus. It was someone who did things on the impromptu. Now, flight response in the Bible. We said someone with flight response many times are the ones who would have one form of addiction or the other. Could be addiction to work, could be addiction to substances and things like that. Now let's look at the man Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived. He had 700 wives, 300 concubines. That's 1,000 women. Tell me if that wasn't an addiction. Ecclesiastic 2 verse 10 says, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Do you know how many things your eyes can desire? And you can have everything. That again, to me, looks like one form of addiction. Ecclesiastic chapter 1 verse 1 to 2. Eventually, he would write that the vanity upon vanity, says the preacher. Vanity upon vanity, all is vanity. I mean, after I have taken everything that his eyes desired, after I had taken 1,000 wives, he ended up with vanity upon vanity. Solomon, to me, was someone who had some form of flight response, because he started so well, was blessed with wisdom that till today God said no one will surpass. But he died a foolish man, because the Bible would later end with the fact that his many women turned his heart away from the Lord. So sadly, in my own opinion, I'm not sure he got out of his flight response. God used him mightily in spite of it, but he did not overcome his flight response. Then Gideon was one of the judges of Israel. This was a man who had the God-given purpose to eventually deliver Israel out of the Midianites. But what was he doing? He was threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press to hide it from the Midianites. You find this in the book of Judges chapter 6 verse 11. Then, okay, I think I even have it here. Judges chapter 6 verse 25. This is another part where God told him to destroy the altar of Baal, but he was scared of doing it during the day. I mean, he couldn't fight. At least he could run. So he was scared of doing it during the day, and he had to do it at night. It's here, let me read it with you, or let's read it together. Judges chapter 6 verse 25 to 27 says, now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. This was a judge in the making who was hiding in the wine press, threshing wheat. Wheat is done up so that the wind can blow it. Wine is threshed at the basement, if I can use that word. So this is a mighty man of valor that had to go to the basement. I mean, he was running from something, and he was running because he was scared. And here God said he should do something. He couldn't do it in the day. Okay, at least I can't fight them. I can take a flight. So let me do it in the night so that if trouble bursts, I can run. So Gideon was someone who demonstrated flight response. But towards the end of Gideon's life, if you take your time to study the book of Judges, I believe he overcame his flight response by the help of God, and is an encouragement to you and I that regardless of any trauma response we may carry, regardless of whatever hand life may have dealt us, we can come out solid on the other end if we're willing to do the work and go the long haul. Now, phone response. Mephibosheth, Jonathan's only son, and is the only one who survived in Saul's household, is someone to me who I believe had some form of phone trauma response. His story can be found in the book of 2 Samuel in your own time. Please use that as an assignment. Now, freeze response. Absalom, one of the sons of David, I don't know what his position was someone who demonstrated freeze response. Because when Amnon raped his sister, the sister was in his house for several months, and he just froze his response, no comment, because of course David, their father, also did not say anything. And in his frozen state, he quietly planned to usurp his father's position. Eventually did it and did so many other atrocities, and of course a cycle of all sorts of things started in David's lineage. But I believe that Absalom demonstrated some form of freeze response. But Elijah is a man that I'm interested in. Elijah was a mighty prophet. But if you remember when Jezebel, after Elijah had killed the prophets of Baal, after I had prayed on that mountain, and God sent fire, and then there was rain, and Jezebel sent a message to him that he would have his head chopped off, and so many other threats. This is the same man who had seen God's hand mightily, but of course in the midst of all of the exhaustion of what a prophet's work entails, he was exhausted and was paralyzed by fear. And then he began to have cognitive distortions and said he's the only one that is left of all the prophets, and now they seek to kill him. And God told him he has 700 men who have not bowed their knees to Baal. I mean, that was cognitive distortion, when you feel you're the only one left. I am the only good person. Everybody is against me. Again, negative belief system, cognitive distortions. Many times will follow all trauma response. But when it is woe is me, woe is me, woe is me, it's more of the freeze response. And what will he do when he was paralyzed by fear? He went to hide in the cave. I mean, tell me, what is a mighty prophet doing, hiding in a cave, if it's not that he was experiencing some form of parasympathetic paralysis? In this case, a freeze response. Now, why have we gone to intersect what psychology says with what the Bible says? Romans chapter 15 verse 4 says, "For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we through the patience and the comfort of scriptures might have hope." If the patriarchs of old, if they also had these trauma responses on some spectrums and still wrought exploits, and if the patriarchs of old did not have as much psychological aid at our disposal as we do now, then regardless of whatever hands life has dealt us, regardless of whatever traumatic experience that anybody has gone through, I firmly believe that we can come out solid, we can come out better, we can come out whole on the other side. Would it be easy? No. But would it be worth it? I tell you, it will be absolutely worth it. And one of the most important decisions that any trauma survivor can make, to become aware of the trauma responses and to begin that intentional journey of unraveling any trauma response, any negative belief system that has been seeded in them. So with that, I go to how we begin to heal trauma responses. Now, how to heal from fun trauma response. We told you these are the people who really are not aware of themselves. I mean, that is like they've lost their identity just to be able to fill in to other people's needs. So the first thing is for such an individual to start with noticing and honoring their basic need for food. Because many times they will go hungry and take care of other people. Basic need for rest, basic need to sleep, basic need that their plate or their cup is full and I can't take on more assignments and I can be more responsible at the detriment of my own health. And it also means that they will also become aware of their fawning behavior. In what ways are you bending over backwards, trying to placate and parent everybody at the detriment of your own well-being? Then also learning to allow yourself have complex feelings, complex emotions, and sit with them without judging yourself, almost like you're beginning to parent yourself again because you parented every other person. Then letting go of any shame of if I don't do this for people, then I'm not good enough. If I don't fill in this gap, then I won't be loved. Then accept that you never deserve the abuse, especially for someone who is in a codependent relationship or someone who still tries to excuse any form of childhood abuse that they may have had. Then begin to engage in self-care and, of course, seek professional support and find social support. I said earlier, these trauma responses are on a spectrum. So there are those that it is incapacitating already. If you find it incapacitating to the extent that you feel is interfering with your life, with your dreams, with your visions, with your relationships, with your purpose, to that extent, decide if you need therapy or social support, or you look for videos like this on YouTube and just begin to understand what is happening to you, or you begin to journal. And of course, you begin to pray about it. But by all means, don't just identify yourself as I have this and then not take the active step to begin to undo it so that you can lay off such a trauma response. So way forward is observe your pattern regardless of any trauma response you may feel that you identify it with. And more often than not, people will have one or two responses. So someone can have a flight and freeze response. So some situations where they can take a flight, they check out and dissociate. And situations where such is not possible, they just freeze and shut down completely. So there are those who have a combination of some trauma response. So observe your patterns. See what you do that has not served you, that this presentation has highlighted, and it's been a consistent pattern in your life. Then begin to incorporate mindfulness practices and mindfulness reflections. Just incorporate that habit of, even if it's 10 minutes a day and you just sit, reflect on what your day has gone, what the day that has gone looked like. What lessons did you take from it? What experiences did you take from it? What are some reactions that have consistent patterns in your life? Then mindfulness practices, learning to really feel and be in the here and now. Most trauma responses will do one of two things. Either it will shoot us forward. For those who have flight response, they are running ahead. Or it keeps someone stuck in the past. It's always one of the two. But hardly in the present moment. So just learning to sit and be with what is bodily. Then begin to notice and honor your basic need. You're tired, you sleep. You're hungry, you sit with it and just process it yourself. Or you're sad, you sit with the emotion or find someone to talk with. So notice and begin to honor your basic need. Your cup is full and you can't take on more responsibility. Say it, speak it. Then know that trauma responses really were coping mechanisms that once served you in childhood, but not anymore. And like I said, it's just like that several jackets that would help you cope in the North Pole. But then you come to Nigeria where it is hot and humid. Those same several layers of jackets can kill you here. So if it helped you cope in childhood, fun response eventually can put you at risk of physical health, not just mental health challenges, as we begin to age and we see that it's no longer serving us. So then, of course, you want to journal and see your patterns. Then therapy, if you find that your responses are affecting your life and your relationships, and of course prayer. I can't say so much without incorporating prayer. At the end of the day, God is at the center of it all. He's right there at the beginning. Before you were formed, before you were knit together and put in your mother's womb, before the trauma happened, God was there. At the end of the trauma, when we are all done here and we're going home, God is still there, and right here in the middle, is in the midst of it. So you want to go to the God who knew you right before the trauma happened and seek his face to restore your personality to the factory setting, to the default setting he had in mind before the trauma came and broke things. So of course you want to commit it to God in prayer. Then you want to read books because like I said, this our generation is more blessed than the biblical generation. So we do not have an excuse for trauma responses hampering our purpose and our pursuit in life. So there are books that are available that can help anybody who is well-intentioned find healing. There are YouTube videos, so you want to find YouTube videos that are in line of such healing. Then if the patriarchs of old survived and wrought exploit in spite of their challenges, so can you, so can I. So commit to healing and commit to seeing a better version of you. So here I have some book recommendations that you may want to start with for a trauma survivor who observes a number of his trauma response and is willing to do all of the hard works to find healing. The first is The Body Keeps the Core by Bessel van der Kolk. Is a wonderful book. I've read it. I think you should too. Then Trauma Recovery is also another one. What Happened to You is also another one. These are books you can literally find their PDF copy to download for free online. So I end with this quote. Wisdom is the result of trauma without the emotional charge. Truth is, when you find anybody who is infinitely wise, they've seen life and not the rosy side of it. But they came out on the other side with a lot of wisdom. But they've been intentional to process all of the emotional charge. So commit to processing all of the emotional charge, and then you begin to experience something called post-trauma growth. Because I tell you, on the other side of trauma, after you've done the work, is a wealth of wisdom that it takes only having gone through what you went through to be able to have such levels of wisdom. So thank you for staying with me as always. It's been a long one. Wish you a wonderful day. See you next week. Bye.